Prince Kaelin of Zyros was a man of unshakable power and unwavering resolve, a ruler feared across the galaxy. His home planet, Zyros, was a vast world of tall, shining cities, towering mountains, and wide, endless oceans. Its people were proud, and their monarchs were known for their strength and their ability to command. But Kaelin, despite being the crown prince, was not like the others. Where most royal heirs were warm and approachable, Kaelin was cold and distant. His dark hair, sharp eyes, and well-chiseled face made him seem even more unapproachable, as if he were made of stone rather than flesh. His royal robes were always pristine, his posture always perfect. He was the very image of a ruler, but his heart was something he kept hidden away from the world. No woman, human or otherwise, had ever gotten close to him. Oh, they tried. There were countless suitors who came from all corners of the galaxy, some human, some alien, and some with bloodlines even older than Kaelin's. The best diplomats, the most powerful families, and the most beautiful women sought his attention, all hoping that his cold heart could be warmed by their charm. But no matter how hard they tried, they always failed. To Kaelin, love was a weakness. It was something that could distract him from his duties. He had seen the pain it caused his father, King Darius, when his mother died in a terrible attack from a neighboring planet. After her death, King Darius became even colder and more focused on his kingdom's expansion. He taught Kaelin that showing emotions was a sign of weakness, something that could be used against him in a world full of enemies. Kaelin had taken his father's lessons to heart. He had built walls around his heart, stronger than any fortress. He didn't need love, and he didn't want it. His duty was to protect Zyros, to lead the people, and to secure his place as the ruler of the galaxy. Love would only get in the way. Despite his resolve, rumors about him began to spread across the galaxy. There were whispers about his coldness, about how no one could get close to him, no matter their beauty or status. Yet Kaelin never seemed to care. He never noticed the looks, the rumors, or the longing gazes from those who wished to be the one to melt his heart. He didn't need anyone. One day, a strange event occurred that would change Kaelin's life forever. The Firethorn clan, a fierce race of dragons from a distant star system, had long held a debt with the Zyrosian royal family. It was a debt that had been passed down through generations, one that had never been repaid. The Firethorn clan was one of the most powerful and respected families in the galaxy, and they had been waiting for the right moment to settle the debt. That moment came when a small delegation from the Firethorn clan arrived on Zyros, led by Lady Thera, a dragon widow. She was a tall, striking woman with scales that shimmered in the light, their deep crimson color contrasting with the dark black wings that folded neatly behind her. Her eyes were like burning coals, fierce and full of wisdom. Despite the immense power that radiated from her, she moved with quiet grace, like a predator waiting to strike. Kaelin had heard of Lady Thera before. The Firethorn clan was known for its warriors, its ancient traditions, and its vast wealth. But Lady Thera was different. She was not like the other ambassadors who visited Zyros, eager to secure political alliances or negotiate trade agreements. She was not here to charm the prince or beg for anything. Kaelin had met many powerful women throughout his life, but none had ever caught his attention. And yet, when Lady Thera stepped into the royal palace, something inside him stirred. She did not seem in awe of him. She did not bat her eyelashes or try to flatter him with words. She was simply there. She was confident and composed, with a quiet strength that he could not ignore. The meeting between Kaelin and Lady Thera began like any other diplomatic session, filled with formalities and polite greetings. But as the discussions wore on, Kaelin began to notice something different about her. She spoke with a calm authority, her words precise and measured. There was no desperation in her tone, no need to impress him. It was as if she saw him for what he truly was, a man, not a prince. Her eyes often lingered on him, not with admiration, but with something else, something Kaelin couldn't quite place. It was as if she could see through the walls he had built, as if she could sense the loneliness that he had buried deep inside. It unsettled him, and he didn't like it. As the hours passed, the meeting grew more personal. The formal talks had ended, and now they were discussing matters of little importance. Kaelin felt an urge to end the conversation, to retreat back into his comfortable, distant world. But something held him in place. Finally, as the evening sun began to set and cast an orange glow across the palace gardens, Lady Thera looked at him with those penetrating eyes and asked him a question that no one had ever dared to ask him before. "Why do you keep your heart locked away, Prince Kaelin?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. The question struck him like a blow to the chest. He had never spoken about his feelings to anyone, not to his father, not to his closest advisors, and certainly not to any of the women who had come to court him. He had never needed to explain himself, and yet here was a woman, one he had only just met, asking him something so personal, so raw, that it left him speechless. Kaelin looked at her, his brow furrowed, trying to find the right words. "It is not for you to understand," he said finally, his voice cold. But Lady Thera didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply nodded, as if she expected this response, as if she had already known the answer. "I understand more than you think, Prince Kaelin," she said, her voice quiet now. "I've lost someone, too. And I know what it's like to bury your heart so deep that you can't even remember where you've hidden it. But I also know that no matter how hard you try, you can never keep your heart locked away forever." Kaelin was stunned. He had expected her to back away, to dismiss him as she had so many others. But instead, she had spoken with a kind of wisdom he hadn't expected. She had made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. The evening ended with no more words spoken between them, but the question lingered in Kaelin's mind long after she had left. Why had he closed his heart off? Was it because of the war that had taken his mother's life? Was it because he had been taught to never show weakness? Or was it because he was simply too afraid to trust anyone again? As he lay in bed that night, staring out at the stars, Kaelin couldn't help but wonder if Lady Thera was right. Was it time to open his heart once more? Or would he remain trapped in his own cold, empty world forever? The days following Lady Thera's visit were filled with a strange sense of unease for Prince Kaelin. No matter how hard he tried to push the conversation with her out of his mind, it lingered there, like a quiet whisper that wouldn't be ignored. Her question, "Why do you keep your heart locked away, Prince Kaelin?" had cracked something deep inside him, something he hadn't even known was there. His cold walls, which had always felt so secure, suddenly seemed fragile, like they might crumble under the weight of his own thoughts. For the first time in years, Kaelin began to question everything about himself, about the life he had built. His father's teachings on power and duty, the lessons of stoicism and control, had they all been in vain? Was his heart truly as locked away as he thought, or had he simply been too afraid to look inside? As he wandered the grand halls of the palace, Kaelin found his mind drifting back to Thera. She had left the palace after their first meeting with only a few formal words of farewell, and since then, she had been busy with matters of diplomacy, her purpose clear: to settle the long-standing debt between her clan and the Zyrosian royal family. Yet even as the days passed, Kaelin could not shake the image of her eyes, deep, knowing, as if they could see straight through him. Lady Thera had made no effort to charm him, nor had she shown any desire to impress him. She had asked no questions about his personal life, nor had she attempted to soften him with flattery. Instead, she had treated him with an honesty that was both refreshing and terrifying. And now, her question haunted him. The Firethorn clan, though ancient and wise, was also known for its pride. To ask for a debt to be repaid was a serious matter, one that required more than mere negotiation. Kaelin's advisors had spoken of Thera's arrival with great reverence. They had all been aware of her clan's history, its powerful warriors, and the role they had played in shaping the galaxy's balance of power. The Firethorn clan was no ordinary family. Their members were descended from ancient dragons who had once ruled vast swaths of space, their fire-breathing abilities and near-immortal lives making them one of the most feared and respected forces in the galaxy. Lady Thera, however, was no typical representative of her people. She was different. After the loss of her dragon bondmate, an event that had shaken her deeply, she had become a widow, and as such, she had taken on a different role in her clan. She was no longer just a warrior, she had become a symbol of both strength and grief. Her presence carried a quiet power, a sense of wisdom born from hardship and loss. The other members of the Firethorn delegation seemed to follow her lead, deferring to her judgment with a respect that Kaelin could not ignore. Although Kaelin had not expected to see Thera again so soon, the invitation to a formal dinner in her honor was something he could not refuse. As much as he wanted to keep his distance, the responsibility of being a prince required him to maintain the delicate balance between diplomacy and personal feelings. And so, despite the turbulence in his heart, he found himself standing before a grand banquet hall, the walls lined with luxurious tapestries that told the history of his people. The guests were already gathered when Kaelin entered. The room was filled with diplomats, scholars, and military officers, representatives from various factions across the empire. But as Kaelin's eyes scanned the crowd, it was Lady Thera who stood out, her fiery crimson scales catching the light. She had exchanged her formal diplomatic attire for something more relaxed, a simple yet elegant gown that hinted at her true nature, fierce and untamed, yet graceful. Her eyes met his as soon as he entered, and Kaelin felt an unexpected jolt. There was no polite smile, no formal greeting. Thera simply nodded in acknowledgement. And yet, in that brief exchange, Kaelin felt as though she could see straight through him. There was no pretense, no game, just a woman who knew him in a way no one else ever had. Kaelin took his seat at the head of the table, but his mind was not on the diplomatic matters at hand. Instead, it wandered back to that moment in the garden when Thera had asked him that question. The conversation flowed around him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The meal itself was rich and elegant, a mix of Zyrosian delicacies and Firethorn clan specialties. The conversations around him buzzed with idle chatter, but Kaelin barely heard any of it. His eyes kept returning to Thera, who sat quietly, her sharp eyes observing everything without judgment. She was not like the others at this table. While the other guests fawned over him and tried to impress him with their words, Thera simply sat back, her gaze steady and unwavering. At some point during the evening, Thera leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but clear enough for Kaelin to hear. "You have many people here, Your Highness," she said, her words cutting through the noise around them. "But I wonder, do any of them truly understand you?" The question was simple, almost casual, but it hit Kaelin like a punch to the gut. It was the same question she had asked before, but this time it felt more direct, more personal. Kaelin had no answer. He had spent so many years building walls around himself that he didn't even know if anyone could truly understand him. His father had been a king who had ruled with an iron fist, and Kaelin had followed in his footsteps, doing what was necessary to protect his kingdom. But the price of that protection had been the loss of his own humanity. "No one understands me," Kaelin muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Thera to hear. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps that is the problem, then." The night went on, but Kalen could not escape the feeling that Thera had seen right through him. The conversation continued, but it was as if a veil had been lifted, and Kalen found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. Was he truly as strong as he believed? Or was he simply afraid? What had he been hiding from all these years? And why was it that Thera, of all people, seemed to see through the armor he had built around his heart? The evening ended with the usual formalities, but Kalen couldn't help but feel a change inside him. He had never thought much about love or companionship or any of the things that others seemed to value. But something about Thera, her quiet strength, her wisdom, her unflinching honesty, had begun to shift his perspective. As the guests filed out of the banquet hall, Kalen lingered, lost in his thoughts. Thera, too, seemed to be deep in thought as she made her way toward the exit. But this time, Kalen didn't let her leave without speaking. "Lady Thera," he called out softly, surprising even himself with the words. "We have much to discuss." She turned to face him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Indeed, Prince Kalen. But first, you must decide if you are ready to face the truth." Kalen stood there, watching as she walked away, her fiery form fading into the shadows of the grand palace. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. And for the first time, he wondered if he was ready to open his heart, to let someone in, to face the truth that he had been running from for so long. The days following their brief meeting in the royal garden were full of distractions for Prince Kalen. Yet no matter how hard he tried to focus on the business of the empire, his thoughts always seemed to drift back to Lady Thera. The image of her standing there, calm and composed. Her sharp eyes watching him as she had asked that one question, "What is it that you are so afraid of, Prince Kalen?" haunted him. It wasn't just the question that troubled him. It was the way she had asked it. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. There had been many women who had come to the palace, seeking his attention, eager to charm him, to win his heart. But Thera was different. She wasn't trying to impress him or flatter him. She saw something in him that no one else had noticed. Kalen had always believed that his strength lay in his ability to keep his emotions in check, to remain distant and detached. After all, that was what his father, King Darius, had taught him. Emotions are a weakness, his father had said time and time again. A ruler cannot afford to be weak. But as he sat in his chambers, staring out over the city of Zyros, he began to wonder if he had been wrong all these years. Kalen had grown up in a world of strict discipline and cold authority. His father had never shown affection, never spoken of love. When Kalen's mother died in an attack by an alien force, King Darius had buried his grief deep within, using it as fuel for his ambition. He had taught Kalen that emotions were to be suppressed, not embraced. But Thera's question had cracked something inside him, something he hadn't even known was there. Could it be true? Could he really be afraid? Afraid of love? Afraid of losing someone again? For the next several days, Kalen found himself alone with his thoughts. He had always been busy with the duties of a prince, overseeing the kingdom's defense, managing diplomatic relations, ensuring the well-being of his people. But now, the tasks seemed to weigh heavily on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something missing, something he had neglected for far too long. As the days went by, Kalen continued to meet with his advisors and generals, preparing for the coming battles with neighboring star systems. The war, which had been brewing for years, was now inevitable. But even in these tense moments, Kalen found himself distracted. Every conversation, every strategy meeting, every decision, he kept wondering if his choices were really his own, or if they were simply the result of a lifetime of fear and control. On the fourth night after Thera's question, Kalen found himself unable to sleep. He wandered through the palace halls, his footsteps echoing in the quiet darkness. He hadn't intended to leave his chambers, but something inside him urged him to move, to find clarity. He ended up in the royal gardens, the very same place where he had met Thera only a few days earlier. The moonlight bathed the flowers and trees in a soft glow, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and lavender. Kalen walked slowly, his thoughts swirling around him. He had always felt a strange connection to the gardens, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts, away from the pressures of the crown. But tonight, the garden felt different. It was as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders, and no matter how much he tried to escape it, he couldn't. As he walked deeper into the garden, he heard a soft rustle of movement ahead. He paused, and then he saw her. Lady Thera stood at the far side of the garden, her back to him. She was staring out at the stars, her posture calm and composed, yet there was a subtle strength in the way she stood. For a moment, Kalen hesitated. What was he supposed to say to her? He hadn't expected to see her here, and yet a part of him knew that he needed to talk to her. He needed answers. Without thinking, Kalen moved toward her. His footsteps were soft, but steady. When he reached her side, Thera turned to face him, her sharp eyes locking onto his. There was no surprise in her expression. She had likely known he would come. "Prince Kalen," she said, her voice low and steady. "You've been thinking about my question." Kalen nodded, his gaze steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know how to answer it," he admitted. "I've spent my entire life pushing emotions away, building walls around my heart. I was taught that love makes us weak, that it makes us vulnerable. But now I don't know. I don't know if I'm afraid of it, or if I've simply forgotten what it means to feel." Thera was silent for a long moment, studying him. Kalen could feel her gaze cutting through him, as if she were peeling away the layers of his carefully constructed armor. "You're not alone in this, Prince Kalen," she said softly. "We all have our fears. We all have our scars. But running from them only keeps us trapped in the past. You've been running for so long, hiding from the pain of losing your mother, hiding from the idea of losing anyone again. But what you don't realize is that love, even in its loss, is what gives us strength. It's what makes us human." Kalen looked at her, her words sinking deep into him. He had never thought about love that way. He had always seen it as something dangerous, something to be avoided at all costs. But now, as he stood before Thera, he began to wonder if he had been wrong. Could it be that love was the very thing he needed to move forward? "I don't know if I can open my heart again," Kalen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so many years closing it off, building walls that no one could break through. I don't know if I can just let them crumble." Thera stepped closer to him, her expression softening. "It's not about letting everything go all at once," she said gently. "It's about taking the first step, opening yourself to the possibility of feeling again. That's where true strength lies, Kalen. Not in hiding, but in facing the truth of who you are, of what you've lost, and what you can still find." Her words were simple, but they held a depth that Kalen could feel all the way to his core. He had spent so much of his life trying to be someone he wasn't, someone who didn't need anyone, someone who could never be hurt. But now, standing here with Thera, he realized that he couldn't keep running. He couldn't keep pretending that he didn't care. He had to face his fears, not just for himself, but for the people he loved, for Zyros, for the future. "I don't know what the future holds," Kalen said, looking into Thera's eyes. "But I know I have to face it. I can't do it alone." Thera nodded, her gaze steady. "None of us can, Prince Kalen. Not even the strongest among us." Kalen took a deep breath, the weight of everything finally settling in. For the first time in years, he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be simple. But for the first time, he was ready to try. As the night grew colder and the stars above continued to shine brightly, Kaelin and Thera stood in silence, side by side, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But for Kaelin, something had changed. The fear that had held him captive for so long was finally starting to fade. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer alone. And that was enough. Prince Kaelin had never been one to open up. Even in his most private moments, he kept his thoughts locked away. His father's lessons had drilled into him that showing emotion was a weakness, something to be controlled, hidden behind walls that were never to be broken. But Lady Thera's words had gotten under his skin, and they weren't so easy to forget. The days after the banquet were full of tension, though not from the war or political dealings that usually consumed his time. No, this time it was something much deeper. Kaelin found himself thinking about her question more often than he cared to admit. Why do you keep your heart locked away, Prince Kaelin? Everywhere he went, he felt the weight of those words pressing down on him, urging him to answer. But how could he? He had never thought about it before. He had built his life around duty, around strength, and around the idea that he needed to be the unshakable leader that his people expected. But now, with the presence of Thera in his life, that carefully constructed facade felt fragile, as if the slightest crack could bring it all crashing down. Kaelin knew that there was no escaping it. He had to face the truth, even if it was something he wasn't ready to admit. It was on a particularly quiet evening, when the twin moons of Zyros hung high in the sky, casting their silver light over the palace, that Kaelin found himself alone in his chambers, staring at his reflection in the window. The city sprawled below him, a sea of lights that seemed to stretch forever. He had been up for hours, lost in his thoughts, but now he stood still, looking out into the vast expanse. His reflection seemed distant to him, almost like the figure of a stranger. He had spent so many years hiding behind his role as the prince, hiding behind his responsibilities, that he had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be vulnerable, to feel. Kaelin's thoughts drifted back to his childhood. He could still remember the feeling of his mother's warmth, her gentle touch as she comforted him after the loss of his childhood friend. That was before the war, before everything changed. The war had taken so much from him, including the people he had loved most. His father's harsh, unfeeling demeanor had become Kaelin's own shield. He had learned from the best how to lock his heart away, to protect himself from the pain that came with love. But as Kaelin stood there, staring at the city below, he knew that it was time to confront the truth. He had never allowed himself to feel love, to open his heart to another person. And now, with the memory of Thera's words echoing in his mind, he realized he couldn't keep running anymore. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, and Kaelin turned to see his trusted advisor, General Orcs, standing in the doorway. Orcs was a seasoned warrior, a man who had served Kaelin's family for many years. His presence was always steady, a calming force amid the chaos of leadership. But tonight, Orcs' eyes seemed different. They were filled with concern. "Your Highness," Orcs said, his voice low, "there are reports from the front lines. The enemy is gaining ground. We need your decision on the next move." Kaelin blinked, shaken from his thoughts. Duty. Always duty. It was so easy to slip back into the role he had always known. "I'll be with you shortly," Kaelin replied, his voice distant. "Give me a moment to think." Orcs didn't question him, merely nodding and leaving the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and once again, Kaelin was alone. Hours passed before Kaelin finally joined Orcs in the war room. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on him, but he pushed the personal thoughts aside. There was a war to win. There was a kingdom to protect. His people needed him to be strong. The map of the galaxy was spread out before him, showing the enemy's movements and the various strategies they had devised to stop them. Kalen's mind was sharp as ever, but there was something different now. He could feel the stirrings of doubt, the nagging question that had followed him since that night with Thera. "Prince Kalen," Orin said, pointing to the map, "the enemy has divided their forces into two main groups. We must decide whether to attack one and risk the other advancing or split our forces." Kalen studied the map carefully. His instincts were always solid, his strategy almost flawless. But tonight, his mind kept drifting back to his conversation with Thera. Her wisdom, the way she had spoken so honestly to him, it was as if she had seen right through his carefully constructed walls. She had broken down his defenses without even trying. "Split the forces," Kalen said, his voice firm. "But prepare for the worst." Orin didn't question him, though Kalen could see the hesitation in his eyes. He trusted Kalen's judgment, but the general had known him long enough to sense the change in his demeanor. The war could wait, but Kalen's personal struggle could not. Later that evening, as the war room emptied and the soldiers prepared for battle, Kalen found himself standing alone again. His mind was racing, but it was not with thoughts of strategy or power. It was with thoughts of Thera. She had been right, hadn't she? The walls he had built around his heart had not protected him. They had trapped him. For years he had believed that showing no emotion made him strong. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that real strength came from allowing others in. From opening his heart to love, to loss, to everything that made him human. Kalen knew that it wasn't going to be easy. There was so much pain in his past, so many wounds that had never healed. But if he was to move forward, if he was to truly lead and protect his people, he couldn't do it alone anymore. He couldn't keep pretending that he was invincible, that his heart was immune to the things that made him feel. For the first time in his life, Kalen understood what Thera had meant. She had seen the truth in him, the part of him he had hidden for so long. She had asked the right question, the question that no one else had dared to ask him. The next day, Kalen sought out Thera. He didn't know what he would say to her, but he knew he had to see her. He had to confront the emotions he had been avoiding for so long. He found her in the gardens of the palace, standing alone, gazing up at the stars. She seemed lost in thought, as though the weight of her own past was pressing down on her. "Lady Thera," Kalen said, his voice soft but carrying a note of uncertainty. She turned to face him, her gaze calm, but there was a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. "Prince Kalen," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I wondered when you would come." Kalen took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your question," he began, his voice quiet. "I've spent so many years hiding from my feelings, hiding from myself. But I realize now that I've been afraid. I've been afraid to love, to lose, to be vulnerable. But I can't keep living this way." Thera nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "It's not easy, is it? To open your heart when you've been taught to lock it away. But I can tell you this, Prince Kalen. You are stronger than you think. Strength comes not from hiding what you feel, but from facing those feelings and allowing them to guide you." Kalen looked at her, his heart beating faster. For the first time, he felt like he was no longer running from the truth. He was facing it, standing tall, ready to embrace whatever came next. And in that moment, he knew that he was no longer alone. The air felt different on the morning of the battle. Prince Kalen stood in front of the war room, the weight of the past few days settling heavily on his shoulders. He had made his decision. No more hiding behind walls, no more running from what he felt. Today, he would lead his people not only with strategy and power, but with the strength of his heart, open and vulnerable. The reports had come in. This was the day. The enemy forces were making their final push toward Zyros, and this would be the decisive battle. All the training, all the preparations had led to this moment. Kalen had spent years learning how to be a leader, a prince, a ruler. But now, after everything he had faced, he knew that being a good leader meant more than tactics and strength. It meant being honest with himself, with his people, and with those he trusted. Thera's question had done more than make him think. It had changed him. And it wasn't just the political decisions weighing on him now, the war, the future of his people. They were all important, but he knew that the real battle lay in facing what he had locked away for so long. His heart. "Prince Kalen," General Oren's voice broke through his thoughts. The general, a steady presence in Kalen's life, stood at the doorway. His face was serious, but there was a slight softness in his gaze, an acknowledgement of the change in his prince. "We're ready," Oren said, his voice low but filled with respect. "The troops are in position. It's time." Kalen nodded, his mind still sharp, his heart steady. The prince who had once ruled with only strength now understood that it was his humanity that would carry him through. As he followed Oren down the corridor to the war room, he couldn't help but think of Thera. She had been right. It was time to let go of the past and step into the future. She had faced her own losses, her own heartaches, and had come out stronger because of it. And Kalen, though still uncertain of where it would lead, felt a glimmer of hope. The war room was bustling with activity when Kalen entered. Maps covered the walls, and soldiers were preparing for the first wave of the battle. But despite the chaos around him, Kalen felt a strange sense of calm. His mind was clear, his resolve unshakable. He knew what needed to be done. "Your Highness," a young officer greeted him as he approached the strategy table. "The enemy is advancing from the west. Their forces are well prepared, but they're overconfident. They're expecting us to attack head-on. We have the advantage if we strike their flank." Kalen studied the map, his fingers tracing the path the enemy would take. He had always been a brilliant tactician, but today, his mind was clearer than it had ever been before. He could feel the weight of the lives in his hands, the soldiers who would fight and die for the future of Zyros. But he also understood that his leadership now meant something deeper. It meant guiding them with the truth, not just with military might. "We'll divide our forces," Kalen said confidently. "Send a smaller force to hold the center, but hit them hard on the flank. We'll give them the illusion of victory, then strike when they least expect it. Make sure the troops understand this is not just a battle for Zyros. This is a battle for everything we believe in. For our freedom, for our people, and for our future." The officers around the table nodded, impressed by his clarity and resolve. Kalen's words weren't just orders. They were a declaration of the kind of leadership that came from strength, but also from compassion. The soldiers would follow him, not out of fear, but because they believed in what he stood for. As the troops moved into position, Kalen couldn't shake the image of Thera from his mind. She had been a quiet strength at his side these past few days. Her wisdom and calm had helped him make decisions that, in the past, he would have second-guessed. Thera had seen through the walls Kalen had built around his heart, and in doing so, she had made him see the truth about himself. He had once believed that leadership meant being distant, being unemotional, that love and vulnerability would be a distraction. But now, he knew that those things were his true strength. He had learned that showing love for his people, and even for those close to him, didn't make him weak. It made him stronger, more capable of leading with empathy and care. The battle raged on for hours. The enemy was fierce, and at first it seemed as though they might break through. But Kalen's strategy worked. His forces held firm, and then, as he had planned, they struck back hard. The enemy was caught off guard, and soon the tide of the battle began to turn. Kalen was in the heart of the action, leading his forces with precision. He was everywhere, directing troops, inspiring them with his unwavering presence. He fought with the same determination he always had. But there was something different about him now. He wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for something greater. As the sun began to set, the enemy forces began to retreat. The battle was won. Kalen's forces had secured the field, and the day was theirs. But even in the midst of victory, Kalen knew that there was still work to be done. This war, this struggle, it was only part of a much larger journey. The future of Zyros would require more than just battles. It would require understanding, compassion, and leadership that came from the heart. That night, as the soldiers celebrated their victory, Kalen found himself once again in the quiet of the palace gardens. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, and the sound of the celebration was distant. He had won the battle, but it was Thera's words that echoed in his mind. Strength comes not from hiding what you feel, but from facing those feelings and allowing them to guide you. Thera appeared beside him, her presence as calm and steady as ever. She didn't say anything at first, but Kalen could feel her understanding. She didn't need to speak. She knew what he was thinking. "You did it," Thera said softly, her voice full of admiration. "You led them not with power, but with heart. That's what makes a true leader." Kalen looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You helped me see the truth I had been running from." Thera smiled, a small, knowing smile. "The truth is always there, Kalen. Sometimes it just takes a little courage to face it." For a moment they stood in silence, both lost in their thoughts, but connected by something deeper. Kalen had spent so many years afraid to let anyone in, but now he understood. It wasn't weakness to care. It was what made him human. It was what made him strong. As the night stretched on, Kalen found himself at peace. The battle had been won, but more importantly, he had won something far more valuable. He had won the courage to face himself, to open his heart to others, and to lead not just with strength, but with love. The days that followed were filled with celebration and rebuilding. Zyros had won, and peace was on the horizon. But Kalen knew that the journey was just beginning. There would be more challenges, more battles, but now he faced them with a heart that was open and ready. He wasn't just the Prince of Zyros anymore. He was a man who had learned that the greatest strength came from the connections we make, from the love we share, and from the courage to embrace who we truly are. And with Thera by his side, Kalen knew that together, they would face whatever the future held, united, stronger, and ready for anything.